have to give you the apologies of our Grand Abbot, Art de Hoyos, who could not be here because of an illness. So please have him in your thoughts. But I'm happy to stand in. We have up here at the table some of our illustrious friars who were given that title in past years. Brent Morris, a past Grand Abbot of the Society, and then on my left, here's Vaughn, and he's moving around a lot, Adam Kendall. So the Society of Blue Friars is an invitational group that is meant to honor people who have made significant scholarly, literary contributions to Masonic writings, people who have written books or large amounts of articles and so on. And you know, the people who devote their time to studying this so fascinating phenomenon of Freemasonry. You know, we're blessed to study a thing that there is no end of, right? You cannot, not one of us can even begin to master all 600 years of our history that we have literature for, let alone even if one wanted to say we just wanted to understand a single lodge perfectly and thoroughly, it wouldn't be very easy. And so this thing is, it attracts the minds of people who love puzzles, who love historical mysteries, who love to study the biographies of fascinating characters. And it's a real blessing to have. When you look at the list of the Blue Friars through the years, it's such a blessing that we've had all of these people addressing the big questions of Masonry, and sometimes the little questions of Masonry, because those are just as important sometimes. So at this point, I would like to do the invocation, which I should have done before I gave that whole speech about the Blue Friars. Brent, could I get the... Thank you. O Lord, our God, great architect of the universe, creator, sustainer, be with all thy children evermore. Particularly we ask that thou wilt be with us at this consistory and guide us in our deliberations and proceedings. This we ask through thy holy name. Amen.
So much be.
Brothers and friends, it gives me great pleasure to inform everyone of our newest Blue Friar, Dr. Paul Rich. Paul Rich was born in Buffalo, New York, where his family has been connected with the food business and philanthropy for over 100 years. He entered Harvard from the Tonbridge School in England and got his A.B. cum laude at Harvard, where he was chair of the Junior Common Room, and secretary of the Liberal Union. And he also got a Harvard master's degree in educational administration. At Harvard, he worked for the Adlai-Stevenson campaign and has been active in the Democratic Party for many years. He was a research professor at the University of Western Australia in Perth, where he obtained his PhD and was on the university council. For 13 years, he was head of supervisory programs at the Emirate of Qatar and advisor to the royal family. He was then a fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution and senior professor of the University of the Americas in Mexico, developing the country's largest post-war sculpture park. He's president of the Policy Studies Organization and its Westphalia Press in Washington, which includes governments, think tanks, and political science departments. and is an advisory organization to the United Nations. It publishes well-known titles such as World Affairs and World Medical. Westphalia now publishes the entire Masonic library collection, keeping all the titles since its inception in print. He is a life member of St. John's Lodge in Boston, both the Northern and Southern Scottish Rites, and numerous research lodges and collateral bodies. Active in Harvard alumni activities, he is the author or editor of 36 books, including several involving Freemasonry. Paul is life governor of Harris College in the University of Oxford, past president of Phi Beta Delta International, recipient of the Cameron Medal for Scholarship, chancellor of Pi Alpha Alpha, fellow of the Royal Historical Society, and fellow of the Royal Society of Antiquaries. And with that, we're going to bring a microphone to Paul so that he can begin his presentation. Brother Paul, thank you so much for being part of this today. We're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you. Is it on?
Yep, it's on.
Well, I am not as infirm as I look. I had a major operation, so I was determined to be here. And I'm glad to say the lead doctor was a Mason. Had he been a Knight of Columbus, I think I would have postponed. But I think he did a good job. The organization I'm going to talk to you about today were the Blue Friars. And they were a 19th century group. And when they met, they always had an owl as a symbol of wisdom at all their meetings. And I'm presenting their owl to the new Blue Friars today that you may keep in a roost somewhere in some lodge. They also met with a chest. And the members were required to provide papers. The papers had to be on yellow paper, which was distributed at meetings. If you failed to present a suitable paper, you were fined 12 bottles of the best quality wine. So during their lifetime, these Masonic friars who were in Plymouth in England produced over 150 papers. In the books, which we're pleased to let you have today, are some of the papers and also some recipes, because they were gourmets. And the attraction of the meeting was the cuisine. More of that later. But this is probably the only Masonic book you will ever have with recipes. If you try them, you will find that they're pretty good after 150 years. They're not bad. Whether you want to have a chest and put your papers in it, or pay the fine of 12 bottles of the best quality wine, is entirely up to you. I think that might drive away members. At any rate, a very good afternoon to you, and I appreciate the honor. Many of my friends through the years have been in the Friars, and I really do take it as an incentive to do more work. I don't take it as a sort of retirement Masonic version of golf. I think it's more of a cheer squad for turning out more things. My own work has been devoted through the years to putting Masonry into the mainstream of historical discourse. Like my good friend Margaret Barr, I've spent my time since Harvard trying to get people to include Masonic studies in their oeuvre. The first thing I did in a scholarship was a series of books on the British Empire and its elite schools. I went to a British boarding school, and the British boarding schools, like Eton or my own school, Tunbridge, all have lodges. Some of them, curiously, have 3 lodges. They have a lodge for the old boys in London. They have a lodge for the faculty and the headmaster. And then they have a lodge, sort of discriminatory, for the groundskeepers and the people in the kitchen, which might strike us in this year of equality as a bit discriminatory. These books that I published, like Elixir of Empire, were intended to show that the British elite transferred Masonic ritual into the empire. And I used a technique that is called prosopography. Prosopography is the calculated study of biography for finite groups. And it has a big literature, very useful for studying lodges and things of that. A large number of books have been written about it as a technique. It isn't used in Masonic scholarship as much as it could be. And I'm glad to say, because of kind reviews in places like the Times and citations, that my thesis about the empire and ritualism has sort of crept in through the back door to mainstream discussion. When I became advisor to the royal family in Qatar, I transferred my interest to the Gulf. Most people are unaware that the Gulf was part of the British Empire. The Gulf flew the flag of the Viceroy, like Lord Curzon, and the people who ran the Gulf states were members of the Indian Civil Service and the Indian Political Service. So these states, like Kuwait, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, Oman, Fujairah, and Qatar, were led and dominated by the British resident, and most of them were Freemasons, and they began to create in their milieu all kinds of quasi-rituals. They could not confer on Muslims chivalric orders, so they devised orders which were not mentioning Christianity in a doctrinal way, and they also had a very curious thing, gun salutes. The emirs of Kuwait, Qatar, other satraps were very jealous of the number of gun salutes that would be given when boats came in the harbor. If they had 3 and the kingdom next door had 4, they vied to get the 4th one. And I remember my astonishment at seeing the voluminous correspondence in London between everybody over who got the gun salute. They also set up quasi-lodges, which would have a feature the King Emperor or Queen Victoria. At any rate, we come to the Blue Friars. I might say, as a historical technique, that we build history out of little things. Attempts to do cosmic history are often doomed. And I have a story of my own experience. when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, the elevator in the Widener Library one day had me with Arthur Schlesinger. And I thought in my ultra confidence, this is my opportunity. I'm alone in the elevator with this famous historian. So I blurted out to him, Professor Schlesinger, what does history prove? What does history prove? Thought that was a good question. He was absolutely silent. So we got up to his floor, and as he walked out of the elevator, he said, little things, little things. Well, little things like you and I do, we don't do foreign affairs or something like that, are subject to the criticism of being Victorian, because the Victorians were great on eccentric footnotes. And more than that, we're often accused of being antiquarians. Now, antiquarian is a bad word in some historical circles because it implies you're interested in minute, unimportant things. But following on Schlesinger's remark, what you or I do are the building blocks of larger history. At any rate, the organization of which I'm fortunate to be president, the Policy Studies Organization, is the gathering place for the Rand Corporation, the Hoover, the Brookings, Heritage, and the other think tanks, as well as departments and universities. So I have it as a challenge to explain my own work amidst people who want to do things like the trade gap, the current administration, and larger topics. But I firmly believe that Schlesinger was right, that the little things add up to big things, and that what you or I do has a great importance, greater than most people appreciate. Westphalia Press, which is the publishing house of the Policy Studies Organization, has about 1,500 books in its catalog. Some of them are tangential to Masonry. We brought some to the table out front, and we're glad to let you have a copy of the book I'm talking about today, because it is pertinent to our general plan of bringing Masonry into mainstream historical discussion, which we do at our conferences. In 1829, a group of Masons and others in Plymouth, in England, in Devonshire, formed a group called the Blue Friars. The Blue Friars did a paper, as I said. They had a ring that everyone got. They disdained business meetings or elections, and the head friar conferred as he wished. The second degree was called lay friar, and if you were a good lay friar, you might be asked to be a full friar. Might, although they were very limited. Now, why were they initially successful? Well, first of all, one of the initial members was connected with Fraser's magazine, which was sort of the Lifetime and Reader's Digest of the day. And although they didn't give away secrets, they were publicized frequently in Fraser's. Secondly, the first abbot was a man named William Jacobson, who was the most famous attorney in Plymouth of the day. Another initial member was William Whitewick, George William Whitewick, who was a famous architect and wrote the best-selling Life of Sir Christopher Wren, as well as the book the Masons used, and which we will be publishing, called The Palace. Another member of this initial Blue Friars was William Harris, who was certainly the leading surgeon in Europe of the day. He devised many tools used in surgery, and all of these were identified also with the craft. But as you go through the book, you'll find jabs at the craft. There's a bit of humor about it, things like that. They wanted to build a lodge, they never did, and in the book you'll read that they took out lottery tickets hoping to get enough money to go to Glasgow and buy furnishings for their lodge from the Masonic houses there. So the start was big, and the rings were popular, and people vied to become Blue Friars. Then there comes on the scene a curious individual. He was a member or officer in almost every single Masonic group you could find anywhere. But in addition to that, he was a champion lawn bowler and president of the bowling league. He was a Dickensian. He loved Dickens, and so he became president of the Dickinson Society. And he got hold of Andrew Carnegie and got £50,000, which at the time was a lot of money, to build a library in Plymouth, which still stands. And out of gratitude, they made him the Plymouth librarian, which he was for many years. He was indefatigable. He put together various histories of the Blue Friars. This book we just published, and it includes 2 of his books about the Blue Friars. It is very striking, almost eerie, how close some of the things they did are to the existing Blue Friars. Giving papers, being involved to a great extent with scholarship, recognizing scholarship. And I was frightened before coming before you today that I would be telling you old news, that you would have heard about this 100 times. And I relied on an oracle, Brent Morris, and he certainly would know. And he assured me that he'd never heard of the Plymouth Blue Friars. Nobody had ever spoken about them. In the discussion of the current Blue Friars, the mention is made of the earliest medieval friars. Well, the Plymouth Blue Friars had a chunk of the friary from the Middle Ages that was given to them. They were certainly aware of the medieval friars, but they were a separate group. Now, to add to the confusion, I have to say that the Blue Friars have had experience with a friar, but not the Blue Friar of Victorian days. And it gets a little confusing. The friar then was called, upon penalty, His Jolliness. Now, whether the friars should now be called their Jollinesses, I don't know. But in those days, if you didn't refer to him as His Jolliness, write on yellow paper and have the paper for the box, and be sure the owl was there, you were in danger of having to stump up the money for 12 very expensive bottles of wine. Another thing that was peculiar to them was they loved to eat. Not peculiar to any of us, I'm sure, but they really liked their food. As you'll see from the references in the book, the recipes. So one has to say that back in the early 1930s, when the Blue Friars of today were started, that there might have been more of a consciousness of the Plymouth Blue Friars than there would be today. Today, they've faded more into the past, but perhaps one has to amend the history of the Blue Friars to include the 19th century Blue Friars. They became so popular that a brand of snuff, popular brand of snuff, was named after them. And a sauce was named after them. So commercial followers had the idea that they could sell snuff by calling the snuff Blue Friars snuff. And they could sell a sort of barbecue sauce by calling it Blue Friars sauce. And then armed with Fraser's magazine, why everybody knew who a Blue Friar was, especially with the very distinguished people it started with. Over their time, they produced over 150 papers. Over 150 papers, many of which relate to the craft. They were peculiar in many ways. They liked to go on excursions to very isolated places. And as you'll see when I read something today, they certainly were not afraid to advertise. When Queen Victoria came to Plymouth in 1843, they sought to get Prince Albert and Queen Victoria to attend and offered to make them lay friars. Victoria had more on her mind than becoming a female friar. And Prince Albert, who was of course a Mason, did not condescend to reply, but it certainly shows a remarkable bit of self-confidence. They also required members on occasion to produce a poem. And if you were going to a meeting, you were in danger of being asked to do a poem for them, especially if they had one of their feasts. Turning to what they were up to, I have to say that this book, two books actually, is not a memorial to scholarship. It is more a recollections of an anomaly in history. Although they refer to Masonry, they're a little critical of it at times. And I suspect in the Plymouth of that day, there was a vying for prestige, as witnessed by their invitation to the royal family to become members of the Friars. I think that reviving the past has a certain utility. I know that many historians don't believe in that, but I think looking back on it, it is also a commentary on our day. At the beginning of the record, it says, contains an account of all their doings from the establishment of the order in the year 1829. And it lists the founders and the canons instituted by us in full conclave. Now, of course, they all had servants, but it clearly states that the servants were not to hear. These were tiled meetings, and they had their secrets. But of course, they also had a cook, and they also had waiters, so they had to let somebody in occasionally. As you look at the past, Plymouth was a beehive of Freemasonry. Every single order commemorated this week has some antecedents then. And they still are a beehive. The author or compiler of this book, W.H.K. Wright, was into every bit of this. And he founded a lodge, which alas now no longer exists, but the several lodges are still in Plymouth and still prosper. And there's a very handsome temple there. When you look at it, you're struck by the poems that were launched. You're struck by the seriousness at times. And his jolliness, who was long time head of it, was a moneyed person, so he had no inhibition about treating them all to very lavish meals. I suppose a free meal would be a good incentive for joining. And believe me, they were lavish meals. However, you were in danger of being pushed into having a poem before you broke bread. And so you were hit by two locomotives. One is you were expected to give a paper for the box, and if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, you had that penalty of the 12 bottles of the best wine, and the officers got to drink the wine to approve it. So it would be an incentive to find the guy, because your next drink might come from the fine. And fines there were. And then the poems, well, let's see what you think of them. Let's see if you agree about them. And I'm not suggesting either that the officers of this Friars pay for your dinner, nor am I suggesting that they make you all give poetry before you break bread. But the canons and rules are all here. And the salutes, God bless the Blue Friars, are here. The rituals have survived. And you'll find, if you're clever, several jibes at the Masons. So I think there was a little bit of rivalry there for who was on top in Plymouth. They also had to wear a costume. Oh my, the costume included breeches, socks, a hat, and it was sort of striped. A Shriner today would be proud to wear it. They are really extraordinary costumes. And I would have loved to have seen them parading through the streets of Plymouth with their breeches and their socks and their strange hat. But the big festival of the year was the oysters. The oysters were brought from London, and they were eaten in huge amounts. And they spawned a certain poetry. I have to say that this is not Shakespeare. You are not going to want Wordsworth or Shelley to move over. The poetry has, shall I put it politely, enthusiasm. Probably enthusiasm as you looked at the table, which you might indeed have. I might add, there was a sisterhood. The wives were cunning. They often sent food. So, of course, you had to do something for them. And so they had a lay friar sisterhood, which rewarded those, I guess, who provided the most. In looking at the poems, I was struck by how the longer the poem, the longer the dinner. I think that the idea was, if we are going to feed you a lot, we expect you to say a lot. There seems to be a correlation that needs scientific investigation. The Brethren of the Order of Friars survived then mainly in this kind of book that was put out by the erstwhile W.H.K. Wright. And so we do not have here the whole corpus, the 150 papers and all the things. And I dearly wish I had the snuff box here today. You could all partake of snuff box. I got you an owl, which they insisted had to be present at all their meetings because it stood for wisdom. And they like to think that. Another aspect of them was, of course, their desire to do charity, which they did, and their desire to push the virtues of the city of Plymouth, England. And as I say, there is a very imposing Masonic temple in Plymouth where many of these bodies meet. There is a lesson out of this, which is that what we do Masonic Week is not irrelevant. It is an archaeology. It is best described as archaeology. Now, these early English Blue Friars were certainly archaeologists. They were well aware and wrote about the medieval friars. They invoked the friars. They had a chunk of the friary, their meetings. They had a serious side represented by the owl. And, of course, they had some extremely eminent members. But they had their peculiarities. I suppose as the century rolled on, that they had been nurtured by the money provided by some of the founders so that the dinners were often free, and the society had occasional appeals for money, but in general was without dues. So when you look at it and examine it, and then you examine the present Blue Friars, you can't help but think back in the early 1930s that somebody was aware of this, aware of Fraser's magazine, aware of these very eminent people tied to Masonry who were Blue Friars. I have no doubt that the Blue Friars looked to the Middle Ages, of course, but I have a suspicion that someone also looked at these friars back in Plymouth, if I could. I don't want to torture you. I think a failing of mine is I actually like their poetry. Well, here's an example of the sort of jab at the Masons. When one of their brethren died, the poetry was, his wit was as fresh as sweet briar, and bright as a midsummer's day. He ought to have been a blue friar, but the Freemasons walked him away. Well, they still gave him a good write-up. But the friars still hope to reclaim him, I suppose, from the grave. From sun, moon, and stars, and all that. And if pride should not too much inflate him, may yet tip him a cardinal's hat. If you were really good, you got to be made a cardinal. You weren't just a friar. And if pride should not too much inflate him, may yet tip him a cardinal's hat. Though he's gone with his Greek and his glory, mid the dust of past ages to sit. And if he should ever tune Tory, it won't be for lack of the wit. These friars were not Tories. They were Whigs. They supported opposition to the Tory party. And so along with a jab at the Masons, you get an occasional jab at the Tories. Politics being forbidden to our craft, we disdain to jab today like they did. Frequently, members of the British Blue Tories, see, I'm getting confused, the British friars were asked to join in chants. I was tempted to ask you to do a chant today after I did one of these, but I thought at the end of the day, it would be imposing. But the poetry, often the writer would do a chant for everybody to chant. So there was participation. Here is one they used at their chapter meetings. Brothers dear, welcome here, votaries of jollity. Now's the time for revel, rhyme, quip or quick or oddity. Brothers true, of orders blue, merry as we still may be, oh never yet will we forget our learned owl's sobriety. I guess they took some consolation from the stuffed owl, reminding them they weren't just eating. Brothers tough and jovial buff, while we the cup of mirth shall sip, let's vow thus ever, hand in hand, to prove the bond of fellowship. Brothers bold, may we hold each to each in woe or weal, strong and clear as balsam here, and firm as hills to sword of steel. Now, balsam was their name for their punch, which included champagne. So when you see balsam in the book, they're talking about their punch. Welcome, jollies, jolly boys, never sigh, chatter pie, This is a chant. Avaunt, Blue Devils! Hail, Blue Friars! Hail, hail, Benedicti! As I say, it's not Shakespeare, but nevertheless, all these distinguished people in Plymouth vying to be a friar, starting out with the first degree as lay friar, hoping to win the lottery so they could go to Glasgow and buy a lot of Masonic equipment. At the beginning of this book, you will find a picture of the lodge they hope to build. And then they have the advantage, I must say, of a wealthy group that were willing to pay on occasion for the food. Plus the wives who got to be in the lay women's group who would send dishes. Plus the cooks and servants who they tiled out of the meeting in order to keep their secrecy. At the back of the book, there is a list of all the people who paid to publish these books. And it's not only a list of very prominent people in England, but of some very prominent Masons. What do I think of them? Well, I think they deserve to be remembered. The passing out of yellow paper that you had to write your notes on, the chest into which you had to put your paper you wrote, the being called upon to do a poem before the big meal, all peculiar. The rings they wore with skulls. Fascinating group. Just as fascinating to me as the British residents of the Persian Gulf, who created, in a sense, the United Arab Emirates, the Abu Dhabi, Sharjah. They were, in a sense, a Masonic creation. My, I guess, best book, Invasions of the Gulf, changed Gulf history. I have an anecdote about it. I noticed it being sold at the bookstore at Heathrow Airport. Well, author's pride, I went in, introduced myself, and said, "How does the book do?" The clerk said, "It gets me into a lot of trouble." She said, "People going to the Gulf rush into the bookstore and buy the book because they think it's about the present Gulf. They get on the plane and discover it's a discussion of 17th and 18th century England and Freemasons. It has nothing to do with the Gulf Wars or anything going on in the Gulf. And then if they do see me again, they say, 'Why did you sell me that big book that has nothing to do with today's Gulf?'" Well, believe me, it does in a sense. In Saudi Arabia, when I was there helping, the Masons used to meet in a tennis court because if you met somewhere in a public building, you might be raided. But that's all changed now. Things have changed in the Gulf very greatly. For example, you were not allowed liquor unless you could prove you were not a Muslim. So the British Embassy would certify you as not being Muslim and give you a permit so you could go to a house out in the country and get your liquor. It was the cheapest liquor you could ever get because there was no tax. The government didn't want to have anything to do with it. So you could get a bottle of Harvey's Bristol Cream for $2. Those days, again, are gone. All the hotels now have bars. And a lot of other things have happened socially. but in the history of the Persian Gulf, as in the history of the Blue Friars, there are a lot of little things that you and I do. And if we are accused of being Victorians, if we are accused of being antiquarians, I would reply, we are archaeologists. Certainly, this brave group were archaeologists. They invoked the past, but they had their own peculiar ways. I have an affection for them, and especially for W.H. Keene Wright, who toiled away to put this together, and several other books which we're going to publish. He was a good Mason, but he was a great raconteur. And he saved these papers, published them, and here he is today in Washington he never visited, and Blue Friars he never envisaged. I'm sure he never thought there'd be any Blue Friars sitting in Washington like you today. That would be out of the question. But yet, in a strange way, the Friars have had 3 incarnations. They flourished in the Middle Ages. They then had this anomaly, this very strange thing that happened to them in Plymouth and has been largely forgotten. And now you, the Blue Friars, and I do appreciate the honor. It encourages me. It's an incentive. Many of your members have been friends of mine, and I'm delighted and really incentivized by your giving me this honor. I'd like to mention that Westphalia Press has published a great many of your people. A favorite of mine is by Brent Morris and Art Turtle, which is the most secret mysteries of the high degrees of Masonry unveiled. Tremendous work, and a number of books by Art Turtle and Brent are in our Westphalia library. You can get them everywhere, any Barnes and Noble, any good bookstore will get it for you, or you can order it on Amazon. Which comes to a final point. We are not in the mainstream of history. We have something to give the mainstream of history. We need to be more marketing for our things. Our books and what we do are unknown to a large part of the world. I thank you for your honor, and I hope you take a book. And if you will, we'll have a second edition. Write me, and we'll put you in it, whatever your remarks are about it, good or bad. I promise, whatever you write us, we'll put in the next edition. Thank you very much.
Take some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Friar Paul, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
You do us a great honor to become part of this.
Okay.
Wonderful talk. At this time, we can take a couple of questions, and I've asked Friar Kendall to assist with that.
First off, congratulations on this honor. And I don't know if there's any record of this, but do you think that the editorial process was improved or degraded after 12 bottles of wine?
Can you repeat the question?
Was the editorial process improved or degraded after 12 bottles of wine?
So the question is, was the editorial process
Yes.
improved or degraded after 12 bottles of wine?
Both. Both. As you read the book, you'll see they were everywhere, and they did everything. they were eclectic. And as I told you, the founders were willing to ante up. If you had some project or something, the money seemed to be forthcoming. Now, occasionally they were broke, and then everything ground to a halt. If they couldn't give a good dinner, they stopped. You will be amazed at their preoccupation with eating, especially eating copious meals, and that's where I mentioned the wives came in by sending big feasts and everything. But you will find everything you ever wanted to find in this. If you say, did they do this or did they do that, the answer is always both.
Any other questions?
Can you tell us more about doing the research?
Can you tell us more about doing the research for
About
the book?
what?
Can you tell us more about doing the research for the book?
Oh, how about the research? Okay. Well, research into Masonry has changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. When I did my work on the Persian Gulf and the Masons in Arabia, non-Masons were not very welcome in most libraries. Now, I was Harvard class of 59, and I'll soon be 90, so you can see that was a long time ago. When I was at Harvard, the master of my Harvard house, Dunster House, we had Gore was a member and others, but the master, Gordon Fair, had also been master of a lodge. And I had access to Masons from the time I was a young man. My grandfather had been one of the first members of the Shrine when it was organized. So I had an advantage in research. Now I can say with confidence that things are much more open and people can avail themselves of the archives in general, which were prohibited many years ago. The Grand Lodge of England has been willing to advertise female Freemasonry on the site. And we have organizations like D. Millay. I was in D. Millay when I was a teenager, and the Jove's Daughters, and the Rainbow, of course. Today, I would characterize research as being an open door for anyone who's willing to look into it. Now, the Grand Lodge of England has a service by which it will even look up if someone had been a Mason. And you fill out a form, and they'll send it. You're nodding your head, you know about that. It's night and day how it has changed. Do I think it's a good thing? Well, I know, as head of a large academic organization, the initial reaction today is still Freemasonry? What does that have to do with the Hoover Institution or Brookings or Rand? And I always say, I don't say it's the be-all and end-all, but it's what Schlesinger told me long ago, these little things are the bricks which build big things. And we certainly are many light years away from anybody in mainstream scholarship appreciating Masonic scholarship. Part of this is mechanical. All the Westphalia books appear on all these sites. If you go into your email tonight, into your laptop, this book is already around the world on all kinds of bookstores, all kinds of sites. Doesn't take a tank or an armored car to get them listed. But some of them have never been given to the Library of Congress. Some of them have never been given to the British Library. They don't get listed. People in these Masonic research institutions that publish haven't the faintest idea of how to get their material before the general public. As I speak now, you might as well have been in this group and dead. Honestly, I cannot overstate the obscurity in which you're doing your work. Now, the reason I put the Policy Studies Organization into this, and the reason for the 1,500 books on Westphalia, I certainly knew the risk that I'd be laughed out of town. People, though, were more curious than they were derogatory, and I'm glad to say it caught on. My work on how the elite at the British boarding schools were exposed to Masonry, joined when they were 18, became Lewis's, things like that, has been absorbed. I do not expect that any one thing should become the be-all and end-all. I'm for diversity in historical studies, and of course, as you imagine, if you're head of an organization that includes think tanks and political committees and a bunch of people up on the hill, of which I will say little, you really find yourself in the crossfire every morning. Every morning I have 2 cups of coffee and expect the worst. If you want to survive in this town and you want to play in that kind of game, you better have a thick tide. But I've always had cooperation with my research in libraries and curiosity. And I do think my analogy to archaeology, you're all archaeologists, I'm an archaeologist. We don't create these things, we mine for them. And especially Masonic Week is really Archaeology Week. It's Archaeology Week. And there should be some people here from all the history departments. There are 12 major universities in Washington, 12 major ones, like GW, which gets a sizable amount of money from the southern jurisdiction. GW has long-standing ties, but how many people from those 12 universities are here today? I venture to say not many, but you have little things that make great things. Now, I just want to ask, forgive me, did anybody here today know about the Plymouth Blue Friars before they came today? 1, good. You got the medal. Very good. That's 1 more than I usually expect. And yet, the Blue Friars certainly attracted some top people, and they had some peculiar ways, and there's a lot more to be done.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Friar Rich. And on behalf of the Blue Friars, brethren and friends who are
Thank
here
you.
today, let me thank you for
Take your
agreeing
books.
to join our numbers. Your insights will provide food for thought for all of us. Thank you for sharing.
And don't forget some of Art's books.
Thank you. And now we will conclude our meeting today. We'll hold our next annual consistory during Masonic Week in 2027. In the meantime, our labors for this session being ended, by virtue of the authority in me vested, I declare this annual consistory of the Society of Blue Friars duly closed. And we'll close with the benediction. Our Father, glorious architect of the universe, we thank thee that thou hast been pleased to smile upon this consistory assembled in thy holy name. Bring us safely to our several homes and be with us all the day long of our lives. And if it be thy divine will, grant that we may assemble together again on the occasion of our next solemn consistory. Amen.
So let it be.